There's a bit near the end of Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where a supercomputer, having spent eons calculating the answers to life, the universe, and everything, tells one of the main characters that the answer is 42. Now, what then follows is that character trying to figure out what the question is in order to lend that answer significance. And you might be wondering what that has anything to do with this event or my topic for that matter. Well, it made me wonder when I read this how often we seek out answers while we haven't really pondered the quality of our questions. So for this TEDx event, we've asked, what big idea do we need for the future? While I question, do we need to think maybe what big idea do we need to get rid of? And the big idea I believe we need to get rid of is the idea of monetary value. You might be wondering why this is the idea. Well, start talking about fixing any big problem in the world, and inevitably someone will ask, where will the money come from? And this, again, is just such a poor question to ask. Why not rather ask, why does money continuously seem to be the stopper in all things pertaining to the betterment of humankind? Or what is the value of a human life? Or what is the price of existence? In order to answer that first question of why money seems to stop us, well, simply put, money and power tend to go hand in hand, and it tends to rest with people who have a lot to gain from maintaining the status quo. And now, just as a preface, I'm not talking about putting everyone on zero, wiping everyone's bank accounts, or taking money from the rich. I'm talking about building a platform from which we can propel our species through some of the rocky waters that lie ahead. At this point, you might be wondering then, how does monetary value being removed from our society actually achieve this? Well, it requires a little bit more of a refinement on the initial thesis. So in order to add some specificity, I'm talking about demonetizing the basic necessities we need to survive: food, water, healthcare, shelter, and shifting the flow of wealth away from encouraging people to profit off of our own extinction. At this point, I'm sure there's at least one person out there wondering about my qualification. What makes me a credible person to speak about this huge issue facing humanity? Am I an economist? No, nothing similar to that, but we're not really at a place in human history where we require experts in past and current systems to tell us based on that what the future might be. We need ordinary people, and millions of them, to not just speak up but take action and shape what our future will be. And I truly wish this presentation could end with a single slide showcasing the perfect design of our utopian society. But unfortunately, that is not the case. That is something that we need to figure out together. So in order to showcase how broken some of our systems are and how monetary value ties in, I have a lot of examples, but I'll start small and go from there. So allow me to paint you a picture. I was but a child in my living room. And in one end of the room, my mom and my sister were reading a fashion magazine. And they were saying how they had to buy a specific type of clothing because the magazine has told them it will be the hottest thing next season. And in the other end of the room, my dad scoffed, how silly are they? Obviously someone paid the magazine to say that. After all, fashion is created by corporations to sell stuff. And to be honest, he then diverted his attention to the Financial Times to decide which stock or currency to invest in. I don't know if anyone else sees the dichotomy there, but I did as a kid, and I pointed out this perceived disconnect, this blind acceptance of recession, inflation, and poverty. And I was told I was naive for not understanding how the economy worked. I'll admit, being told I was naive frustrated me, but not nearly as much as this blind dismissal of the very idea that our economy might be rigged. Those of you amongst us that believe blindly in the rising and falling tides of wealth might be surprised to learn that although all physical money in the world amounts to about $7.3 trillion, it's only about 8% of actual monetary value in the world, meaning that 92% of it exists exclusively as numbers on computers. Admittedly, largely this could be due to the fact that some of the richest people in the world find a lot of their wealth in how confident people are about their companies being profitable, referring here to the stock market, really. But even though not all of that wealth is liquid or movable, and even though I'm not claiming that moving money is the actual objective here, I do want to showcase just how misdistributed this resource is. And actually, Oxfam has done that for me already by saying that currently, the 26 richest people in the world own as much as the poorest 50% of humanity, meaning more than 3.8 billion people have less between them than 26 people. And I decided to add some more numbers to it because I know that's a huge divide to wrap your head around. So if you took £100 million and you divided them equally amongst those 26, each one would get more than £3.8 million. Do the same with 3.8 billion, and each one ends up with less than 3 pence. To reiterate something I said before, I am not talking about taking from the rich and giving to the poor. It's not a Robin Hood scenario. I am talking about building a system based on care, equality, that doesn't leave people behind suffering and starving needlessly just because the numbers on their bank account do not warrant their continued existence. And I know this sounds like communist propaganda to some of you. I'm absolutely sure. And I will fully admit it wouldn't be the first time I get accused of something like this. While I was living in the United States, I got called a leftist and a communist so many times. And it wasn't because I was shouting about Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto or sharing videos of Slavoj Žižek. It was because I criticized privatized healthcare, saying health should be a right, not a luxury. And it was funny how often they thought they'd cornered me. They'd say things like, well, if healthcare should be free, should food be free? Should shelter be free? How about handing bottled water to everyone? Imagine their surprise when I said, yeah, that's exactly what it should be like. And I'll admit, this is not something that's atypical of me. I don't really shy away from ideological conflict because I've found that if I just stand my ground and allow myself to gracefully push back, most people don't know what to do from there. And just a pro tip to any budding debaters out there, if you do decide to go down this route in life, try and leave emotion out of it. I often say I don't get angry, I just get aggressively articulate. So, on the communist conversation, the typical response is a laundry list of historical atrocities asking if I support those. And as easy as it would have been to go down the divisive rabbit hole of politics, I decided to take a different route. I went with the argument that no one could ever quite fight me on, which was cancer research. So think about it, who benefits from cancer research? Who has had or will have cancer, or knows, has known, or will know someone who has had, or will have cancer? I'm pretty sure that's pretty much everyone, right? Apart from maybe some cancer-free hermit up in the mountains that never knows anyone. But still, cancer researchers need to beg for funding? Why don't we just research cancer? Simply put, it's because everyone involved needs to pay rent, a mortgage, food, put their families through school, and the corporations up top need to make a profit. But let's look at a different scenario then. If a meteor was heading to the Earth, promising an extinction-level event, would you expect space agencies around the world to say, we could do something about this, but only if all of you donate to this cause and do a fun run? Because at this point in time, that's effectively what corporations are doing about climate change. But can you imagine how quickly we could affect pollution in the world if we could demonetize the very things that will be our undoing if left unchecked? Can you imagine how quickly the 1% would change their tune if overnight green energy and recycling became the most profitable thing around? This seems like a distant dream to us, perhaps, a world based on these ideas, but perhaps all I want to do today is awaken the dreamer in all of us and allow us to lucidly see that the world doesn't have to be like this. It can be better, and we just need to find the way. We need to explore options. And look, we could explore options like the ever-popular idea of universal basic income. You know, enough money every month guaranteed to support those basic tenets of life. But let me tear that Band-Aid off really quickly. That is not enough. The new line of poverty would simply be drawn at that basic. Rent would go up and so would prices. If you doubt that's the case, just Google any information about minimum wage hikes and how changes in rent and price follow and put lower income families in a worse position. So, look, the more you look at it, the more you see that at this point in time, we just desperately need to guarantee housing. We need to stop thinking of food, health, and water as luxuries for those that can afford it and see it as what it is. It's a human right. And look, this brings me on to the next topic, which is really the question of where will the money come from, of course. That answer has sort of been covered already, so I'll move on to the next question, which is, if we guarantee all these basic needs, won't everyone stop working? Well, the short answer is no, but no one's come here to see a speaker answer a closed question with a single answer. So really, if you allow me to elaborate, if we look at work in general, people find a lot of purpose in work. People might even enjoy what they do. And if you don't, wouldn't it be nice to be able to spare those people the monotony of waking up every day to the crushing realization that they hate 40, 50, or 60 hours of their week? And even if you do love what you do, what about things that are out of your control? A member of my family has been a teacher for most of her life, and after spending decades loving this super underappreciated job, her health broke down to the point where she couldn't work anymore. Does she still deserve to live? Because our current systems don't seem to think so. Between mortgage payments, a dependent child, and expensive medication, had she not been able to rely on her grown children, she would have been on the streets deciding between expensive medication or food for her child on where to spend her benefits. So what's the price of her existence? And it's not just health that can put you in that position. So let's look at the rise of AI. There's been a lot of jokes around in different panel shows about how AI is most likely going to replace mainly jobs that no one wants to have. But this does not change the fact that according to the McKinsey Global Institute, 800 million jobs could be lost by 2030 globally due to AI and automation. So I ask you, what is our solution here? Will these millions of people go homeless and starve? Because, again, where will the money come from? The more we look at it, the more we'll see that while money may not be the root cause of our problems, it sure as hell seems to be the thing that keeps us locked away from solutions. So, off the top of your head, what are some of the biggest crises that we face as a planet? Climate change, worldwide famine. We could even go into a robot apocalypse, but we don't have time. So, if we talk about climate change, everyone's talking about it. It seems to be becoming a hotter and hotter topic for some reason, with people talking about, you got that. People seem to be talking a lot about going vegan, using less plastic, cycling rather than driving in order to make an impact, and I support that. I'm a vegetarian, I try to be as sustainable as I can, but do we want to make an impact? Well, let's talk about the 100 companies, mostly fossil fuel providers, that account for the 71% of all global emission. If we shifted our focus away from profit and towards human sustainability, do you think those companies would be spurred into changing their ways? Or do you think they would still just invest in military hardware to fight for the oil beneath the melting polar ice caps? Yeah, exactly. The second one, right? And I know, as with everything else in this talk, there's a lot of questions, like who's actually going to run companies when the acquisition of wealth is no longer the primary purpose of life? And I agree. Capitalism is not likely to thrive in a society that puts people over profit, that focuses on human empathy. But consider the alternative. There is no business to be done on a dead planet. So perhaps 21st century capitalism is a worthy sacrifice for our own survival. Moving on to famine, I'll stop by here very quickly, but we often think of famine as something that happens in the third world, in super poor countries. But in reality, 8.4 million people in the UK struggle to put food on the table while we throw away 1.9 billion tons of food. These are people that are going hungry not because there isn't enough food, but because we would rather throw it away than give it to them. So with the looming threat of AI threatening to take our jobs, with Wars on resources threatening our health and security, and climate change just ravaging our planet. How is the normal person still spending upwards of 40 hours a week creating wealth for corporations just because they will face starvation, homelessness, repossession if they don't comply? We've made ourselves into wage slaves, holding a gun to our own heads, meeting ransom demands that if we work together, we could throw away and build a better world. So I'll leave you with these couple of final thoughts. In Star Trek First Contact, bear with me, Captain Picard is asked by someone in the 21st century why the crew of the Enterprise do not have money. And Captain Picard answers, in the future, the acquisition of wealth is no longer the primary function of a human being, but rather we work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity. Seeing that as a kid made me think for the first time, that's the future I want to live in, and it's stuck with me ever since. Now, Star Trek First Contact takes place in the 24th century, minus the time travel, but let's make Gene Roddenberry's ghost proud and make it happen sooner, because if we aim to live to the 24th century as a species, we need the apostasy from the old ways. We need to rebel, we need to stick together, care, and make a change, because guys, without a drastic change in the way that we run our world, the Nietzsche of our future will nail a piece of paper to the graveyard of our species, saying humanity is dead, and we have killed it. Thank you.